Part 1, The Unbreakable Janitor. The terror waves hit mining station Zeta-7. The mining station Zeta-7 shook violently as another wave of pure terror crashed through its metal corridors. Commander Vextar pressed his scaled hands against his elongated skull, feeling the familiar ice-cold grip of fear creeping up his spine. Around him, his crew members were dropping like flies, some curled up in corners whimpering, others staring blankly at walls with tears streaming down their faces. "Sir, the fear generators are getting stronger," Lieutenant Quinda buzzed through her translator, her compound eyes darting nervously. Her 6 arms trembled as she tried to maintain her grip on the control panel. "Our people can't take much more of this." The enemy had appeared 3 days ago, ships that looked like floating nightmares, all twisted metal and pulsing dark energy. They called themselves the Dread Harbingers, and their weapon wasn't lasers or missiles. It was pure, concentrated terror, beamed directly into the minds of their targets. Most species broke within hours. One human keeps working. Through the chaos, a steady sound echoed from the maintenance corridor. Splash, scrub, splash, scrub. Commander Vextar's head snapped toward the noise, confusion cutting through his fear. Someone was still working. Marcus Webb pushed his mop bucket down the hallway, humming an old Earth tune under his breath. His maintenance jumpsuit was stained with grease and cleaning solution, and his weathered face showed nothing but mild concentration as he worked on a particularly stubborn scuff mark on the floor. "Human," Vextar called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Did you not feel that last terror wave?" Marcus looked up, pushing his gray hair back from his forehead. "Oh, that weird shivery feeling? Yeah, I felt it. Reminded me of the time I had to clean the haunted house back in Ohio for Halloween. Creepy place, but someone's gotta do the job, right?" He went back to mopping. Lieutenant Quinda stared at him with all of her compound eyes. "The job? Human, we are under attack by beings that can drive entire armies insane with fear. How are you still cleaning?" "The human's strange immunity." Marcus shrugged and dipped his mop in the bucket. "Well, see, I've been doing this for 37 years. Started cleaning office buildings when I was 18, moved up to hospitals, then got this gig out here in space. You know what I learned in all that time?" He paused his mopping to look at them seriously. "Dirt don't care if you're scared. Stains don't disappear because you're having a bad day. People still need clean floors to walk on, whether there's monsters outside or not." Another terror wave hit the station. Vextar gasped and stumbled, feeling phantom claws rake across his mind. Several crew members screamed in the distance. Marcus just kept mopping, his movements steady and rhythmic. "Besides," Marcus continued, "I've seen worse things than space monsters. You ever try to clean up after a kid's birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese? Now that's true horror." The calm spreads. Something strange began to happen. The area around Marcus seemed quieter. The overwhelming sense of dread that had been crushing everyone's spirit felt lighter near him. Crew members who had been cowering in corners started to stand up straighter when they passed by. Commander Vextar noticed it first. His breathing became easier when he stood within 10 feet of the human janitor. The icy grip of terror loosened its hold on his mind. "How are you doing this?" he whispered. Marcus looked genuinely confused. "Doing what?" "I'm just cleaning. Though I gotta say, you folks really need to work on your ventilation system. All this panic breathing is making the air pretty stale." Lieutenant Quinda's antennae twitched with sudden understanding. "Commander, I think his calmness is somehow affecting the psychic field. The terror waves are weaker around him. The spreading effect." Word spread quickly through the station's communication system. Crew members began gathering near Marcus as he made his rounds. The Jacksonian engineers clustered around him as he cleaned their workshop. The Veltorian pilots followed him to the hangar bay. Wherever Marcus went with his mop and bucket, the oppressive fear lifted. This is impossible, Vextar muttered, watching his broken crew slowly return to their duties. One human cannot neutralize a terror weapon designed to break entire civilizations. But the evidence was right in front of him. Marcus Webb, 65 years old, a maintenance worker from Earth, was somehow immune to the most powerful psychological weapon in the galaxy. And more than that, his immunity was spreading to others. "Hey, Commander," Marcus called out, wringing his mop in the bucket. "You might want to get someone to fix that leak in Corridor 7. Water damage is gonna be a real problem if we don't take care of it soon." The commander stared at him. Here was a human who was more concerned about a water leak than about the army of terror-inducing aliens trying to drive them all insane. And somehow, that simple, stubborn focus on everyday problems was saving them all. The terror waves continued to hit the station, but they were getting weaker. The crew was fighting back now, inspired by one man's refusal to let fear stop him from doing his job. Marcus Webb just kept mopping, humming his tune, completely unaware that his ordinary human determination was about to change the course of an intergalactic war. Part 2, The Sleeping Engineer. The reactor room becomes a nightmare. Military outpost Delta Prime had been humanity's proudest achievement in the Outer Rim, a fortress of steel and energy that had never fallen to enemy forces. Until now. Chief Engineer Tolvek watched his crystalline hands shake as another pulse of raw terror swept through the base's systems. The reactor core, normally a steady blue glow, flickered with unstable energy. "The fear waves are interfering with our power grid," he reported to Security Chief Bractios, his voice crackling like breaking glass. "Every time those ships hit us with their psychic weapons, our people lose focus. The engineers can't maintain the systems when they're paralyzed with dread." Bractios, a massive amphibian warrior whose skin usually glowed with confidence, had turned a sickly yellow color. His webbed hands gripped his weapon tighter with each terror wave. "How long before we lose main power?" "At this rate? Maybe 2 hours," Tolvek replied grimly. "Unless we can find someone who can work through the fear." Enter the sleepy human. That's when they found Jake Morrison. The human engineer was curled up on a maintenance platform right next to the reactor's main control panel, using his tool bag as a pillow. His work coveralls were wrinkled, and he had a peaceful expression on his face as he snored softly. The reactor's humming seemed to match his breathing rhythm. "Human." Bractios boomed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "How can you sleep during an attack?" Jake opened one eye, then the other, and stretched like a cat. "Oh, hey Chief. Sorry, I was up all night fixing the coolant pumps in Sector 12. Figured I'd catch a quick nap before the next shift." He yawned and sat up slowly. "What's all the commotion about?" Another terror wave hit the base. Bractios stumbled backward, his amphibian features contorting with supernatural fear. Tolvek's crystalline body began to crack under the psychic pressure. Throughout the base, screams echoed as soldiers and engineers alike succumbed to overwhelming dread. Jake just rubbed his eyes and looked around. "Wow, everyone seems really stressed out. Is it Monday already?" The impossible calm. "The dread harbingers," Tolvek managed to say through chattering crystal teeth. "They're using terror weapons to break our minds. How are you not affected?" Jake stretched his arms above his head and cracked his knuckles. "Terror weapons? That's what that weird feeling is? I thought maybe I was having a bad dream." He stood up and walked over to the reactor controls, completely relaxed. "You know, I used to work night shifts at a power plant back on Earth. You learn to sleep through anything when you're that tired." The reactor's glow stabilized as Jake's hands moved across the controls. His movements were smooth and practiced, like someone who had done this job 1,000 times before. The energy fluctuations that had been plaguing the system for hours suddenly evened out. "Impossible," Bractios whispered. "The reactor is responding to him. Sleep as a superpower." Jake yawned again and leaned against the control panel. "You know what? I'm still pretty tired. Mind if I take another quick nap? The reactor's running fine now, and I find the humming really soothing. But the terror attacks, Tolvek protested. They'll hit us again any moment. Sure, but the reactor doesn't care about that, Jake said matter-of-factly. It just needs someone to keep the power flowing. And honestly, I do my best work when I'm relaxed. He lay back down on the maintenance platform, closed his eyes, and was asleep within minutes. The reactor's glow became stronger and more stable than it had been in months. More importantly, the area around Jake seemed to radiate the same peaceful energy. The spreading peace. Security Chief Bractios noticed it first. The crushing weight of fear that had been pressing down on his mind lifted whenever he stood near the sleeping human. His natural green color began to return, and his hands stopped shaking. Chief Engineer, he called to Tolvek. Come closer to the human. Tolvek approached cautiously. As he got within 15 feet of Jake's sleeping form, the cracks in his crystalline body began to heal. The constant terror that had been fracturing his thoughts faded away. By the 7 suns, he whispered. He's creating some kind of calm field. Word spread through the base's communication system. Soldiers and engineers began making excuses to visit the reactor room. They found reasons to run diagnostics near Jake's sleeping form. Some even brought sleeping bags and tried to nap nearby. The power of rest. The next terror wave hit the base with double the intensity. Throughout the facility, aliens screamed and cowered. But in the reactor room, Jake continued to sleep peacefully, and everyone near him felt the fear bounce off like water off a duck's back. I don't understand, Bractios said, watching the human sleep. How can unconsciousness be a weapon against terror? Tolvek's crystalline form had fully healed now, and his voice was clear and strong. Perhaps it's not unconsciousness. Perhaps it's the opposite of fear. Complete, absolute peace. Jake stirred in his sleep and mumbled something that sounded like, just 5 more minutes. The reactor hummed in response, its power output increasing by another 10%. The breakthrough. Engineer reports began flooding in from across the base. Systems that had been failing for hours were suddenly operating at peak efficiency. The shields were stronger, the weapons were more accurate, and the life support systems were running better than ever. It's not just the reactor, Tolvek realized. The human's presence is somehow stabilizing all our technology. When our people aren't paralyzed by fear, they can do their jobs properly. Bractios nodded slowly. The dread harbingers use fear to break civilizations. But this human, he's immune to their primary weapon. And more than that, he makes others immune too. Jake woke up naturally about an hour later, stretching and yawning. Oh, hey guys. Thanks for letting me sleep. I feel much better now. He looked around at the gathering crowd of aliens. Wow, everyone looks a lot less stressed out. Did I miss something important? Another terror wave hit the base. This time, nobody in the reactor room even flinched. Jake just scratched his head and said, "There's that weird feeling again. You know, it kind of reminds me of the time I had to work overnight during a thunderstorm. Lots of noise and scary sounds, but the power plant kept running just fine." He went back to work on the reactor controls, humming softly to himself. The alien crew members watched in amazement as their most powerful defensive systems came online, powered by the unshakable calm of one very sleepy human engineer. Outside, the dread harbingers were beginning to realize that their terror weapons were losing effectiveness against this particular target. But Jake Morrison was already planning his next nap, completely unaware that his ability to sleep through anything was turning the tide of an intergalactic war. Part 3, The Calm Medic. The battlefield turns into hell. The medical station on Kepler 439b had seen its share of wounded soldiers, but nothing like this. General Swixera folded her massive feathered wings tight against her body as another wave of supernatural terror washed over the battlefield. Her keen avian eyes, designed to spot prey from miles away, now darted nervously at every shadow. "The casualties are overwhelming us," she squawked to Medic Krelon, whose tentacles writhed with anxiety. "The dread harbingers aren't just attacking our bodies anymore. They're breaking our minds first, then picking off the survivors." Krelon's healing appendages trembled as he tried to treat a wounded Velic soldier, but every few minutes another terror pulse would hit, and he'd lose focus completely. "I can't concentrate, General. Every time I try to perform surgery, the fear waves make my hands shake. We're losing patients we should be able to save." The mobile medical unit shook as explosions echoed across the desert landscape. Through the transparent walls, they could see soldiers from a dozen different species running in panic, their formation completely broken by the enemy's psychological warfare. The unshakable healer. That's when Dr. Nathan Cross looked up from his patient. The human field medic had been working steadily for 6 hours straight, moving from one wounded soldier to another with practiced efficiency. His surgical scrubs were stained with the multicolored blood of various alien species, but his hands were perfectly steady as he worked. "Hey, could someone pass me more plasma bandages?" he called out calmly. "This Thorgak warrior has a pretty nasty wound, but it's nothing I haven't seen before." General Swixera stared at him in disbelief. "Human, did you not feel that last terror attack? It was strong enough to break the mind of a seasoned Krillian berserker." Nathan glanced up briefly, then went back to his patient. "Oh, that cold shivery feeling? Yeah, I felt it. Reminds me of my first day in the emergency room back on Earth. Scary stuff, but you learn to push through it when people are depending on you. Healing through the horror." Another terror wave crashed over the medical station. General Swixera's feathers stood on end, and she had to grip the wall to keep from fleeing in panic. Medic Krelon's tentacles curled up in terror, and he couldn't bring himself to touch his instruments. But Nathan just kept working. "You know," he said conversationally while suturing a complex wound, "I used to work in downtown Detroit. Friday night shifts in the trauma ward. You see some pretty intense stuff there too. Car accidents, gang violence, overdoses. People screaming, families crying, blood everywhere." His voice was steady and calm, almost soothing. "But here's the thing I learned early on. When someone's life is in your hands, you don't have the luxury of being scared. Fear is just another distraction, and distractions kill patients." The wounded Thorgak warrior he was treating, a massive reptilian being known for his fierce temperament, was listening to Nathan's voice with surprising calmness. The creature's vital signs, which had been erratic with terror, began to stabilize. "The healing field. Doctor," General Swixera said, her voice filled with wonder. "Look around you." Nathan paused in his work and observed the medical station. Within a 20-foot radius of where he was working, the wounded soldiers were calmer. Their breathing was more regular, their vital signs more stable. Even the medical equipment seemed to be functioning more smoothly. "Huh," Nathan said. "That's interesting. Maybe it's because I keep talking to them. Bedside manner is really important, you know. People heal better when they feel safe." Medic Krelon approached cautiously. As he got closer to Nathan, his tentacles stopped writhing with anxiety. The overwhelming fear that had been paralyzing him for hours began to fade away. "Human, how are you doing this?" "Doing what?" Nathan asked, genuinely confused. "I'm just treating patients. Same thing I've been doing for 15 years. The spreading calm. Word spread quickly through the communication channels. Wounded soldiers who couldn't be moved were asking to be brought to the human medics section. Not just because of his medical skills, but because the terror waves couldn't seem to touch them when they were near him. A Xylorian pilot with 3 broken limbs was wheeled into Nathan's area. As soon as he entered the calm zone, his panicked chittering stopped, and he looked around with clear, focused eyes for the first time in hours. "The pain," the pilot clicked in his native language. "It's still there, but the fear is gone. How is this possible? Nathan smiled and began examining the pilot's injuries. Sometimes the worst part isn't the physical damage. It's the panic that comes with it. When I was a paramedic back home, we had a saying, calm medic, calm patient. He worked with smooth, efficient movements, his hands never shaking despite the explosions outside. I've seen people die from treatable wounds because they were too scared to let us help them. And I've seen people survive impossible injuries because they stayed calm and focused on healing. The impossible discovery. General SY watched in amazement as her medical station transformed. Soldiers who had been screaming in terror just minutes before were now resting peacefully. Medical staff who had been paralyzed by fear were returning to their duties with renewed confidence. It's not just psychological, Krelon reported, his tentacles now steady as he performed delicate surgery. The terror waves are actually being dampened in this area. My instruments can barely detect them near the human. Nathan finished treating the Xylorian pilot and moved on to his next patient, a young Falarian scout with severe burns. You know what? He said to the cat-like alien. This reminds me of the time we had a multi-car pileup during a blizzard. 37 casualties, power was out, roads were blocked. But we just took it one patient at a time. Another massive terror wave hit the battlefield. Outside the medical station, soldiers dropped their weapons and fled in panic. But inside Nathan's zone of influence, everyone continued working calmly. The ripple effect. The calm began to spread beyond the medical station. Soldiers who had been treated by Nathan and returned to duty carried some of that peace with them. They found they could function normally even when the terror waves hit. Their squad mates noticed and stayed close to them. Doctor, General SY said, her voice filled with respect. You're not just healing bodies. You're healing minds. Your calmness is somehow infectious. Nathan looked up from bandaging a Cruolian warrior's arm. Well, healing is about more than just fixing wounds. Sometimes people need to remember that they're stronger than they think they are. He finished with his patient and looked around at the peaceful medical station. Wounded soldiers were resting comfortably, medical staff were working efficiently, and the terror that had been breaking minds across the battlefield couldn't seem to penetrate this small bubble of humanity. Besides, Nathan added with a small smile, someone's got to keep their head on straight around here. Can't have everyone panicking at the same time. Outside, the dread harbingers were beginning to realize that their terror weapons were completely ineffective against certain areas of the battlefield. But Dr. Nathan Cross was already focused on his next patient, completely unaware that his dedication to healing was creating the galaxy's most powerful defense against fear itself. Part 4, The Focused Cook. The Starship Under Siege. The battleship Cosmic Herald shuddered under the relentless assault of the dread Harbinger fleet. Captain Mordak's armored exoskeleton sparked with nervous energy as he gripped the command chair, trying to maintain order on a bridge filled with terrified crew members. His usually proud stance was hunched with the weight of supernatural dread. Shields at 40% and falling, reported pilot ZYTHIC, his energy form flickering with anxiety instead of its usual steady glow. The terror waves are disrupting our crew's concentration. Engineering can't maintain power distribution when they're paralyzed with fear. Another pulse of pure horror swept through the ship. Several bridge officers collapsed, curled up in fetal positions, while others stared blankly at their stations with wide, unseeing eyes. The ship's defensive systems wavered as the operators lost focus. Sir, ZYTHIC's voice crackled with desperation, we're losing crew effectiveness across all decks. At this rate, we'll be completely defenseless within the hour. Captain Mordak was about to respond when an announcement came over the ship's intercom system. An unexpected announcement. Attention crew, this is Bobby in the galley. Lunch service will continue as scheduled despite the current situation. Today's special is mushroom barley soup with fresh bread. Anyone who needs a hot meal to keep their strength up, you know where to find me. The captain's mandibles clicked in confusion. The cook is still cooking? Pilot ZYTHX energy form brightened slightly with curiosity. Should we tell him to abandon his post and seek shelter? Before Captain Mordak could answer, another terror wave hit the ship. This one was stronger than the previous attacks, designed to completely break the will of the crew. Throughout the ship, soldiers abandoned their stations and huddled in corners, whimpering with fear. But from the galley, they could still hear the sound of chopping vegetables. The unshakable chef. Bobby Chin Williams stood at his prep station, methodically dicing onions for his soup. His chef's whites were spotless despite the chaos around him, and his movements were precise and practiced. The galley's industrial kitchen hummed with activity as he moved from stove to prep counter, checking seasonings and stirring pots. "Hey there," he called out cheerfully as Captain Mordak and pilot ZYTHX entered the galley. "You folks look like you could use some comfort food. Soup's almost ready." Captain Mordak stared at him in disbelief. "Human, are you not aware that we're under attack by beings capable of driving entire armies insane with fear?" Bobby paused in his stirring and looked up. "Oh, that weird creepy feeling that keeps washing over everyone? Yeah, I noticed it. Reminds me of the time I had to cook for a biker rally during a thunderstorm. Lots of scary-looking people, lots of tension in the air, but everyone still needed to eat." He went back to his soup, tasting it with a wooden spoon. "Needs a little more salt," he murmured to himself. Cooking through chaos. Pilot ZYTHX energy form flickered with confusion. "But the terror waves, how are you not affected?" Bobby shrugged and began ladling soup into bowls. "Well, I've been cooking professionally for 23 years. Started in my grandmother's diner in Texas, worked my way up through truck stops, fancy restaurants, military mess halls, and now here in space. You know what I learned in all that time?" He arranged fresh bread beside each bowl with practiced precision. "People need to eat, no matter what's going on around them. Doesn't matter if it's a kitchen fire, a dinner rush from hell, or an alien attack. Hungry people are cranky people, and cranky people can't do their jobs properly." Another terror wave struck the ship. Captain Mordak felt his exoskeleton systems shut down from the psychological overload, and pilot ZYTHX energy form dimmed to almost nothing. But Bobby just kept cooking, humming an old country song under his breath. "Besides," Bobby continued, "cooking is meditation for me. When I'm focused on making something good for people to eat, everything else just fades away. The nourishing calm." Something extraordinary began to happen. As Bobby worked, the area around the galley began to feel different. The overwhelming sense of dread that had been crushing the crew's spirits seemed to lighten. The terror waves that hit the ship still carried their supernatural fear, but they felt muted, distant. Captain Mordak noticed it first. His exoskeleton systems came back online, and the crushing weight of terror lifted from his mind. "Human, what are you doing to the psychic field?" Bobby looked genuinely puzzled. "Psychic field? I'm just making soup. Though I did add some of those Alterian herbs that are supposed to be calming. Maybe that's helping." Pilot ZYTHX energy form began to stabilize and brighten. "Captain, look at the ship's readings. Power distribution is stabilizing in the sections near the galley." Word spread quickly through the ship's communication system. Crew members began making their way to the galley, drawn by both hunger and the promise of relief from the terror attacks. As they entered Bobby's area of influence, their fear faded and their abilities returned. "Feeding the resistance. This is impossible," Captain Mordak muttered, watching his broken crew slowly return to normal function. One human cannot neutralize a weapon designed to break the minds of entire fleets. But the evidence was right in front of him. Bobby Chin Williams, 47 years old, a cook from Earth, was somehow immune to the most powerful psychological weapon in the galaxy. And his immunity was spreading to others through the simple act of feeding them. "Here you go, Captain," Bobby said, handing him a steaming bowl of soup. "Made it extra hearty. You look like you could use some energy. As Captain Mordak ate, he felt his strength returning. Not just physical strength, but mental resilience. The terror waves continued to hit the ship, but they no longer had the power to break his will. "Human," he said between spoonfuls, "how is this possible?" Bobby was already preparing the next batch of meals. "Well, my grandmother always said that food made with love and care has special power. She used to cook for the church during hard times, said that sharing a good meal could get people through anything." The spreading feast. The galley became the heart of the ship's resistance. Crew members who couldn't leave their posts had meals delivered to them, and wherever Bobby's food went, the calm followed. Engineers who had been paralyzed by fear returned to their duties. Gunners who had abandoned their weapons resumed their defense of the ship. "The shields are strengthening," pilot Zythiachik reported, his energy form now glowing with renewed confidence. "Crew efficiency is returning to normal levels across all decks that have received meal service." Bobby smiled and continued cooking. "You know, this reminds me of the time we had to feed 300 people during Hurricane Katrina relief. No power, limited supplies, but we made it work. People need comfort when times are tough, and sometimes the best comfort is just a hot, home-cooked meal." Another massive terror wave hit the Cosmic Herald. This time, instead of breaking the crew's spirit, it seemed to bounce off harmlessly. The ship's weapons returned fire with renewed accuracy, and the shields held firm. Captain Mordak watched in amazement as his vessel, which had been moments away from complete defeat, began pushing back against the dread Harbinger fleet. "One cook," he whispered in wonder. "One human cook is turning the tide of this battle." Bobby just kept stirring his soup, completely focused on making sure everyone had enough to eat. He was unaware that his simple dedication to feeding people was creating a psychic shield that protected the entire ship, or that his grandmother's recipe for mushroom barley soup was about to become the most strategically important dish in galactic history. "Seconds, anyone?" he called out cheerfully as another terror wave failed to penetrate his kitchen sphere of influence. "There's plenty more where that came from."